Well, yeah, the camera's right here. Hi,
Up there,
everyone.
right there. I gotta look
Good
up there.
day.
Is that right?
You can't, man. Just you're perfect, actually.
Oh, wow.
We've been trying to convince the ram to lighten his horns a little bit. We'll grow some new
Well,
ones.
yeah, 'cause I can't help but lean my head a lot.
Is it
So
the head leaning Aries?
part of the problem with being an Aries, which is in Western astrology, symbolized by the animal of the ram. And you'd say, why the ram? Because in springtime, the rams would come out of the mountains. As for those who don't know what rams do, in the winter time, they go up into the mountains. They separate themselves from the ewes. The ewes would be the female sheep. But in the springtime, they come down from the mountains and they copulate. And for those who don't know what that means, well, I think everybody knows what that means.
So, I am Ray Carey Perillo,
And I'm
and this
Michael P.
is
Perillo.
Michael G. Perillo.
Michael G. Perillo. Where do I get P from? I guess it sounds because my name is Perillo. and I
Right. That's
think
the
of P.
that's the old school conversations,
Well,
right?
yes, I'm always been MP. I never put my middle initial there. So today we would like to, of course, we entertain live people at Chit Chat in the chat room. Is it called?
Yes. If you would like an astrology reading, you would like us to read for someone else, you want us to kind of get an idea of whatever it is that's on your mind, and you have a birth date for us, we will offer a live reading for that.
As soon as we see that someone is in the chat room. Otherwise, we will continue with giving people information about astrology. In this podcast, we'd like to get into discussing how astrology came about. Many people,
along with discussing our services and encouraging you to click on the link below if you want a private reading.
Right.
What we offer is we do live personal readings. You can use Western, Chinese.
Well, we use that.
Right. You can select which type of personal reading you would like. The services are listed when you click on the link below. Additionally, with the personal astrology readings using 3 different systems, which you would prefer, we offer it's your naming syllable. We can shoot an email to you briefly if you just want to know what your naming syllable is, to just incorporate that into our name. The more that we can connect to our authentic selves, the more we can manifest our purpose.
For those who want a complete reading, a very intense reading, you'd have to indicate that, and
that's why we have a link.
Right, there's a link, and that's how they inform us.
Right, and that's how they access our services.
Right. Okay.
Furthermore, what we also offer is it's a program called Soul Recovery. So this is really the 12 keys to success and inner harmony. It is a 12-week program, and it's a process. It's an incredible therapeutic program where we go through a process of deconstructing the myths about ourselves that we tell ourselves inside, to connect to a more profound place of self-forgiveness and self-love in the framework that the self is intended.
So Gary mentioned the word myth. And I want to emphasize that
there are so many ways.
This word myth is one of the words that many modern scientists, the church, other organizations, conservative organizations, have always poo-pooed astrology as coming from mythologies that was compiled by herds people as they were taking care of their sheep, that somehow this was put together by a bunch of people that considered themselves magicians or belonging to witches. The problem with this is that it makes no sense, because it was astrology that was fully developed, from which astronomy was derived. So these so-called astronomers who poo-poo astrology, and you will find many astronomers have very strong feelings against astrology. They have their whole beginnings dependent upon astrology. Why? Because astrology had to have all of the mathematical precision that is used to determine astronomical data. And this has been true for all time. Do you want to add something to something like that?
Yeah, what I was going to say, of course, we discuss this often. Astrology really measures the world of the subjective. It really measures your internal world. Of course, it has a conversation about your outer world, but it's really having a conversation about your relationship and your subjective experiences. That's the realm of the feminine. So when we go into the more material form of physics and move into astronomy, that's going to be a more masculine framework.
Objectivity.
Objectivity, yes.
But the fact of the matter remains that if this was developed by herds people, imagine um, we for a very long time
Well, it
believed.
says a lot about them, right? That
Well, we
what an incredible system to come from simple people.
for a long time
Right.
we have held it that man was only 5,000 years old. Everything was 5,000 years old. Can you imagine men running around in sheepskin or pigskin and a club in their hand? That these people that ran around in 5,000 years ago, that they were also capable of reading what constellations were up in the sky. We can't see today with our naked eye the planets. Most of them we cannot see with our naked eyes. In fact, we don't know the difference between when we're looking at a planet and when we're looking at a star. They all have, if they're seen at all, they're seen as objects that have light on them. Otherwise, we do not see them. And yet, to do astrology, you have to know where all of the 10 planets that we use in a horoscope. And let's remember, as we have said in other podcasts, that we call the heavenly bodies that we use in astrology, we call them all planets. That includes two luminaries, which are the sun and the moon. So I mentioned that because anybody who's getting very technical, they'll say, well, they're not planets, but we call them that just to make it easy that we have 10.
Right. It's the vernacular of astrology, really.
Now,
and also, though, Plato and Aristotle, what they mastered, Sumerian, Babylonian astrology.
Right. And they go back 2,000 or 3,000 years, and then they had everything intact. Keep in mind that the astrology that we were using, of course, today it's becoming more modernized and it's including a lot more, much greater span of space than in the past. But Plato and Aristotle and the Romans, they all knew astrology in its complete form. To know that the amount of mathematics that you have to have is incredible. Not to mention the Mayan system, which used a system that far exceeds the complication of Western and Chinese astrology, far exceeds by thousands and thousands of years. So this thing that we could say is just taboo, it's nonsense, it's a hocus pocus, it's developed as an occult thing, is not true, because planets have an effect on each other. If you don't believe that, well, we have what's the area with all the planets, the asteroid belt.
Oh, the asteroid belt.
The asteroid belt is a proof that something blew up between Mars and Jupiter. Something happened there. We don't know what it was.
Right.
But we believe it was a planet.
Well, astronomically, we would evaluate that through the laws of physics. Astrologically, what we look at are the relationships.
And today, we're beginning to say that the dinosaur was wiped out because a comet hit the Yucatan Peninsula. Yeah. So we know that affects the Earth. It affects the Earth in a very, very great way, if indeed that was true.
Well, and in a way, right, it would make sense that when the way that things affect the Earth, and we're on the Earth, we're all part of the stardust. We're all part of that. So whatever the rules are that affect our consciousness in that place, it is going to be true for the Earth as well as it is for us.
But what makes astrology...
It doesn't mean we really know. It just means it's true.
What makes astrology very, very convincing to me is that there is mathematical precision. And we know that the closest thing that we have to true science is mathematical precision. Now, astronomers consider themselves pure scientists or science, and they call, if anything, astrologers, not to offend people, call themselves para-astrology,
Or
or I should
pseudoscientists.
say
Pseudoscience, right.
pseudoscience. But it's a science, because without the mathematics, you cannot do anything. Now imagine that these men that were running around as sheep herders were looking at the stars, and they can compute the movement of planets, where they would be positioned in over the span of a year, over a span of 2,600 years, over a span of 25,000 plus years. This is incredible that they would be able to do this as farmers and sheepers, as cavemen running around with clubs in their hands. No, astrology, if it has any history, it has to go back maybe hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years ago in order to, to give you an example, for a sheep herder to look at just the solar system. The solar system takes 2,000, about 2,600 years to move around
Go through one sign.
one segment or 30 degrees of the circle, which encompasses one of the 12 signs, so that we have 30 degrees for each of the signs. 12 signs, that's 360 degrees. And for those who do geometry, we know that's a circle. But for the solar system to travel around the galaxy called the Milky Way, that is our galaxy, it takes approximately 26,000 years. Now, they would have had to seen, these sheep herders would have to be observing the stars for at least several thousand revolutions of the solar system to really be able to note down all of the information that comes from astrology. So astrology, let's put it this way, it's far, far older than we think. It came from before the area that we call by Syria, before the Assyrians, before the Babylonians, much before, way before. It was established in its complete form. If we go to Jyotish, which is the system that India practices, it is claimed there that their astrology goes back at least 60,000 years. And of course, let's keep in mind, we don't know what kind of historical data was kept 60,000 years ago. It may bring us to millions of years before. Would you like to add something on that comment?
Yeah, so what this brings to mind for me is, how do we know things? What are our ways of knowing? And so far, and we have incredible research, and a lot of things have changed very quickly in terms of how different scientists view different processes. It's what happens is that the process of analysis is very slow, right? So that form of knowing, very three-dimensional, very deliberate, takes a very long time. So there are other ways of knowing. If you want, did you want to add to that?
Oh, well, I was going to say
I was going
that.
to give another
No,
example of
go
a
ahead
form of
if
knowing.
you want to complete your thought.
Okay. So the other day, I was talking to my transcendental meditation instructor, and I was explaining that sometimes when I go into the meditation, that I transcend, and just before I transcend, I get this weird little, like, kind of like these sounds, like these diffuse voices, and then all of a sudden nothing. And I can, like, come out of the meditation a few hours later. But what was interesting is that I kept thinking to myself, wow, gosh, I don't even have his name. The director of the original Superman from 1978. There was a way that and Michael hasn't seen it, so there's a way that they had trapped the prisoners in these crystals for some reason, and you could hear their voices. And I thought to myself, that sounds kind of similar to what happens right before I transcend. And not to say I do it all the time, but when I do, that's kind of sometimes what happens. And so I look up the director. Oh, it's Ronald. I should look it up. And Michael isn't so good at looking that stuff up. Otherwise, I could have a wingman for that. But it turns out the director is also a transcendental meditator. So that's another form of knowing. It's just merging ourselves into that state. So then we'd have to say, well, what were their practices like back then? What other ways of knowing were they using or practicing?
What we do know is that we can say with certainty that the stories about how astrology was created is kind of silly. It makes no sense that herdsmen, sheep herders, came up with observing the stars and came up with these 12 zodiacal signs and all of the interpretations of how planets affect each other. Let's just think for a minute that the amount of information required to do an astrological chart, just that information alone requires sophisticated mathematics. So my contention is that astrology came in its perfect form many millennia years ago, many millennia years, because the complication of observing things just astrologically, just from the space, is, as Carrie pointed out, it's a subjective view. Well, yes, the subjective part of astrology is where they assigned values for the signs. But in terms of their relationship to one another and how they may affect each other, these are given pieces of information that has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. These weren't just invented by anyone. After all, if they were invented, on what basis? We don't have any, and no astronomer has ever been able to refute astrology on the basis of how it was created and to be able to refute that it was a nonsense science. How, after all, did their science become so valid if it came out of astrology? And that's a fact.
Well, the way that we're beginning to sort of reconcile some of this, and there's a lot to know, it's an incredible body of information, is quantum physics. Quantum physics has the formulaic discussion. They're able to describe and provide a framework of how these things communicate and how they relate to each other, and discover the rules by moving around different mathematical formulas and seeing what would be produced when they apply the formula. It's really interesting. Michio Kaku is incredible.
Right.
And they're also still careful at the same time not to go woo-woo.
Well,
but it's nothing but woo-woo.
Today, there seems to be a little bit more leniency towards the attitude towards astrology. And the reason is because when we look at astronomy, we're looking at relationships between planets and the speed that they're traveling and what they may or may not cause each other to do. Astrology simply says that there are conditions when planets approach each other or separate from each other. What their proximity to each other can be used to conclude. Let's understand something. We still use astrology today to predict weather, and most people don't know that. The Farmer's Almanac was always based on astrology, always, for as long as it's ever been developed. And the meteorologists of today are using astrology when they conclude that there's going to be rain, or there's going to be earthquakes, or we're going to have sunspots that affect the earth because the sun is flaring. And what condition causes that? Usually Jupiter becoming in proximity to the sun. And that's called perigee to the sun. It's getting close to the, perigee would be the Earth getting closer to the sun. Jupiter would be I'm trying to remember the term.
See, now these are Western astrology.
Right. Well, it's when the Jupiter gets close to the sun, and because Jupiter is so large, it affects the sun. And sunspots, flares, cause a reaction on the Earth. And we can predict what those are. The same thing with meteorology, what planets affect the weather, what the surface of the Earth, and that is how close they get to in the proximity of the Earth, at what time, and in what angle. Angles are very important.
Perihelion.
Perihelion, right?
Perihelion,
That's right.
that's right,
It was
that's
the
right. I was trying
closest
to,
to
yeah,
the sun, right?
right,
That's
right.
it was coming to me, but I
Oh,
was losing it.
and the name of the Superman director that's a transcendental meditator is Richard Donner. That's the one
Oh,
I
okay.
I was blown away, but it's so
So
exciting.
and so this is not a bunch of occultists. This is not a bunch of
Well,
witches dancing
right.
around the fire.
And the real meaning of a cult is simply something hidden. There's nothing.
Well, a
It's just
cult
because someone can say a cult doesn't
you
mean that it's bad. It's just the
a
tone that they're
cult
using.
is a very savvy word, and it indicates things that are beyond that which we smell, see,
Right,
touch, and hear, or taste as well.
right.
So a cult is
Rudolf Steiner, for
right. A
example,
cult is really going
and
beyond the
yeah,
boundaries.
he's a deliverer of
Right.
light,
And a
really.
cult is a very good word to describe when you're going to higher states of knowledge. It's superior thinking. But this thing with astrology being taboo, it's because the church was the greatest enemy of astrology. Why
Well,
would the church do that? Do you know, Carrie?
well, it actually started out when King David decreed that to outlaw astrologers.
No, the church actually started that.
Well, it started with that. Um, and then and initially what
You're
happened.
talking about King David in the Jewish
Yeah,
Bible. Oh
yeah.
yes,
So
yes. King David. I'll elaborate on that. But go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. So part of the problem, and of course we have this today. You know, Michael and I practice astrology. It's the same thing as practicing medicine. Nobody's perfect at it, and we all have different angles from which we approach it.
Hmm.
There has to be humility. This isn't something that you tell
If
somebody.
you don't want to be trapped with your ego getting involved.
Right, right. This is a way that we connect to other people and a way that we share an evaluation of ourselves together. It's just a
But you want
practice.
to go into King David when you're
So
ready.
yes,
When you're ready.
so what happened, of course, is that whenever people have these gifts or these skills, they stop using them for the right reasons. They disconnect from the original divine complete picture that they really are. And at which point that's when people start to lose faith.
What happened in the case with King David was that the Jews were using astrology as fortune telling. They would set up their tables in the squares, and for a dollar or whatever the currency was there, they would give you a reading about what was going to happen. King David saw this as nonsense because they were not true astrologers. True astrologers were scientists. And this is something that none of the people who criticize astrology ever come to recognize. That
Yeah,
the astrologers were not a bunch of herdsmen coming up with ideas. What did
they
you
were
want to say?
right. They were intellectuals and philosophers
They
and
were beyond
served, right.
intellectuals.
They served.
They were
Right.
mathematicians.
Well, we're talking, yeah, because we're talking about even like Merlin is a really good
Yeah,
representation.
well, the three magi that was supposedly there
Right.
when Jesus was born, these were
Right.
considered men of very high knowledge.
Right. High priests.
And so, what
Yeah.
happened with King David? These people that were in the square giving these cheap readings were gypping people off. So,
Well,
King David said, "We are outlawing astrology because this is not what astrology is about. Astrology is not about the smallness of what's going to happen tomorrow. Astrology is really about the course of a lifetime, the course of the planet as it moves around the solar system, or I should say around the sun, and the course of the solar system as it revolves around the Milky Way. This is very complex. It's not designed, first of all, to maybe to many it will be a shock, that astrology was not designed to discuss man in any way. That is a fact. Astrology was designed to express what would events would take place with the earth, with the weather, and if it's applied to the earth, the most it could talk about was if there were countries or let's say
well, weather
continents,
events,
continents,
wars.
weather, what was going to happen with weather, wars if they were to break out. They could deal with that because these subjects dealt with the planet. And guess what? All those events are events that are caused to the planet and vice versa, the planet causes those events to also occur. There is a symmetry between the two, between the cause and the effect creating the cause. These two have to be in symmetry to each other. For everything has a balance, everything has an opposition to it. Just because we haven't figured out how to travel with anti-gravity does not mean that it does not exist. It simply means at this date, at this point in time, we haven't developed that ability. But if we look at some of the monuments that are left behind, you'd have to say that this civilization was beyond anything we know, the ones that created these giant monuments, and also maybe that they had the use of anti-gravity. But we're getting off the subject at this point. We get back to astrology. How was it then that astrology started to be used on people? Because you can take a large event and hone it down to a minor event. This would be the macro versus the micro, right?
Yeah.
And we know that there are two signs that represent the micro and the macro, which you should know what they are, right?
Right. It's Virgo and Sagittarius.
Talk about it.
Well, what I actually want to talk about is finishing up. So there's the stories, right, that we hear of why things don't work. But I also view the Bible as a discourse through the process of the evolution and development of the soul. And it's a theme that's repeated over and over again. When we start using, as opposed to developing the self, remaining self-focused, creating and building our spiritual, I guess, maturity, what happens is we have a tendency to rush to people who are fortune tellers. We have a tendency to have instant gratification, to need to know something right away. And so also the purpose of outlawing that form of discourse is for the purpose of us getting back to our relationship and our connection with God, that we see ourselves as first and foremost the responsible. So in astrology as well, in terms of how we know, we have the stories of astrology, but also there were seers. So in the legends, in the Vedas and all of that, the seers basically were people that downloaded the information, went into states of great meditation, received the information. What does that tell us? It tells us that we're designed to receive all of that. So from this perspective, when you look at it from the macro versus the micro, what you have is an overview, right? You're like the Sagittarius, you run into a problem, you run into issues. What do? You have to zoom out. You have to get a look at how the entire picture looks. And then you go back in to the micro and the Virgo, who fixes and repairs and analyzes what's going on with the equipment.
But the interesting thing about this micro and macro is that the planet Mercury represents the micro. And we see that in the sign Virgo, because Virgo is detailed and it looks at things finer and finer and finer and finer until we reach a point where we can't see anything. And Jupiter represents the macro in astrology. And that is that we see things larger and larger and larger until we're looking at the span of the universe. Now, this is how astrology was developed with the planets. And that's how their values were assigned. And each of the planets really describe what the Earth goes through and what the Earth goes through and how the creatures on the Earth are affected, because the Earth is a living thing. This is another thing that most people are not aware of, because we look at the Earth as something we stand on, and for some reason we think we're either different or above or separate from the Earth. But no, we came from the womb of the Earth, just as our parents came from the womb out of some other woman's body. The same thing occurs on many There's many, many different levels.
Like my grandma.
We're coming from the womb of the earth gives rise to all kinds of creatures. Scientists has made this so mechanical that we've lost touch with the rhythm of energy. And astrology is really an attempt to discuss the rhythm of energy as it affects all life, not just human life. Because we've brought it down to the level of the humanity, it's becomes far more difficult to be accurate because there's one thing about human beings that sets them far apart from all other creatures, whether they be animal, whether they be rodents, serpents, whatever they are, whether they're
A
blade of grass, whether they're insects, whether they're microbes, that the human being has what is known as free will. And this is what makes astrology appear to be something that a bunch of midwives got together and came up with while they were having their babies.
Midwives are pretty
Or
smart.
the herdsmen were coming up with while they were trying to keep themselves from falling asleep and not watching whether a wolf will come into their sheeps.
I have an aside because when we're talking about the herdsmen, even though, you know, some people may say they're foolish, here's what I have to say, a little quick piece of trivia for you. Feminism, the original wave of feminism in the United States started in the Midwest, particularly during the Civil War, because the women had to be literate to take care of the farms and the animals and everything else. And we have to take on that incredible amount of responsibility. Inherent is that is a need for intelligence and wisdom and observation.
Anthropology says that men are the gatherers and women are the distributors. They're the teachers. They're properly the ones who teach. A man is only there to reinforce reinforce rules and laws that keep a society together. But
so even dismissing herders, it's like, guess what? No, in order to save us, we have to be literate to do it.
Right.
In order to feed the masses.
So this astrology is very interesting because it could not have been developed even 20,000 years, even 200,000 years. The amount of information that was known about it, just as mathematics, where the hell did mathematics come from?
Right.
When we think about it,
it came from the observer.
We say we got it from the Arabs. Where did the Arabs get it from? It starts to become a vicious cycle of search. The fact is that the further you look back, the further you must look back beyond that. And we go farther and further back until there is no time. And now we're starting to ask the question of when did man begin? And that's a whole other conversation, which we're not going to attempt to do here.
Right. Well,
but
maybe, yeah.
At some point in time, we will get to that too, because this
that's a big topic.
Leprechaun Alley is about really what makes the world go round, and why are things here that are mysterious and different, and why do we have the kinds of myths or stories that we have? Are they based on reality? Are they based on make-believe? And who would make believe about things, especially when these things are repeated over and over and over and over again through the history of mankind?
Right.
It's not as if only one people, the Irish, came up with the leprechaun. No, the Italians have a scazza maruzziello, at least in the part of Italy where
the Lakota have the little
originates.
People. They say if you see a little person, don't look at him. That's a Lakota.
Every society has a little creature. So then what do we say? They were imagining this? Or is it possible? Is it possible that we're just an illusion to each other? An illusion that feels, touches, sees, tastes. These are the things that make us human. It's what makes us feel that we're real. But are the leprechauns real? We don't know. Do they live on the same space that we live? Are they possibly from different dimensions? And dimensions may cross from time to time, and we see each other. And for those who see ghosts, could that also be another dimension? where it crosses over into our dimension for a temporary amount of time, and we see things or we think we hear things. In many cases, it's true that we imagine this because, well, life has a way of fooling us. Light can change things from one thing to another in a second. But there are many cases in which one can establish that there was truth in the event of seeing a small creature or a ghost or who knows, Bigfoot or whatever, and then he can't be found again. So maybe Bigfoot lives in a different dimension, and from time to time, our dimensions cross. And when he steps into that area where the dimensions cross, we see them or they see us or vice versa. It doesn't matter.
Right.
What we do know is we can't explain how we got here or where we came from, how it is that we're born from a little teeny seed or an egg and a sperm that we can't see except under a magnifying microscope.
Hmm.
That's,
So yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Add something more to it. Why not?
yes. So this is a good time to really talk about. Now I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, the importance of the observer, the importance of the observer
Yes,
having that
we didn't get to that, but
experience.
that's a big thing.
But that's really where we're going with this. Um, how can things be known? It's incredible because even when we look at the atom, right? The atom is what, 98% or more space. We have protons, neutrons, and electrons. We have no idea how it operates. We can't really control it. Um, in chemistry, the electrons are exchanged with other different molecules.
Mhm.
Um,
But what we do know about the atom is that if you were to look inside of it and take it apart, it would look like the constellations. It would look like the
right.
planets. They are rotating around one another in a very similar way. The same thing with the cells of our bodies. Everything is moving in almost exactly the same way as what we observe.
And we're in constant movement and exchanging electrons all the time
Right.
with
Right.
everything.
Well,
So
go ahead.
so even sometimes when we get like little glimpses or pieces of information, it just may be that some unit of consciousness happened to meet ours at the same time, and bam, there it is. We just know, like deja vu. There are so many cool explanations for how
Well,
this phenomenon
let's throw a
occurs,
real
which is
wild.
why we want to practice, and which is why we like, especially from the Vedas. It's like a list of directions for how to handle your star vehicle.
Well, let's throw a bomb out. Let's throw a bomb out in the open here. Thought. Where the hell
Oh,
does thought come from?
okay. Oh, Joshua had a question.
Oh, let's go with
Well,
that.
Joshua he wants to know what we mean by terrestrial astrology, what the terrestrial.
Terrestrial astrology. Well,
Because tarot refers to the earth.
no, it's not tarot. It's
No,
terrestrial.
I didn't say tarot. I said terra. I use the terrestrial. So
Well, that's Terra. That's
Terra,
Terr. That means the earth.
right. That's what I was saying.
It's not tarot, which is
No,
Tar.
I didn't say tarot. I
Okay,
said
all right.
terra.
Well, it's based on the earth. In other words, it's based on it's driven by the moon. It has to have around 13 complete moons. In the 13th cycle, actually, it's 12 full moons, but they make up a 13th moon at the same time that Westerners make up what they call a leap year. They make up one day because they lose a certain amount of time that doesn't follow with the clock that we have. So we make things up to accommodate our clock. Terrestrial astrology refers to a system developed by the Chinese,
right.
and it's
And
pretty
welcome,
much
Joshua.
and it's pretty much used by the whole eastern side of the I guess the eastern side of
The planet.
what is it? The hemisphere, the eastern hemisphere.
Yeah.
Right, from India over to Japan. That is where they all practice Chinese astrology with a little bit of difference. To give an example, in China, the year of the rabbit is known as the Year of the Cat in Vietnam. It happens that neither are wrong because the Chinese use a glyph. The glyphs are how they write, and glyphs are how they also depict animals. They use the same glyph for the cat in China as they do for the rabbit. So the Vietnamese simply like the cat better. And we use the cat only because most people who are listening to us are familiar with cats. Unless you're on a farm, then you're more familiar with rabbits, perhaps.
Right.
And then the rabbit would be just as the same as if you
Right.
use the word cat.
Yeah, the references that are more culturally relevant oftentimes make sense.
Now, most people say that they're not anything alike, but yes, they are. If we look at both animals when they're sitting on the grass, you couldn't tell the difference between most cats and most rabbits. Now, there is a difference between some cats that are larger jawed, some rabbits with larger ears, but basically they're going to be similar. To go further about their similarities, the rabbit, if you hold it close to you, you must hold it tight. Otherwise, it's very fearful. And if you don't hold it tight, it'll kick with its hind legs. And I know because I've held rabbits, and they'll try to bite you. They'll try to take a nip at your hand. If you hold a cat, the very same thing. They don't like to feel insecure, so you have to hold them rather tightly. And they will kick with their hind legs. The difference is that they do more of a job on scratching you because the difference between rabbits and cats is that one has nails, the other one has claws. But the cat will do the same thing. It'll try to nip you on the hand the same exact way as a rabbit.
Right. So
They're both very
yeah.
shy. They're both very possessive. We could go on and on and on.
Oh, yes, they have
as
lots
to
of
why
babies. They're prolific with procreation.
right, they're both prolific. We can go on and on about these two, but we don't want to have a discussion only about the rabbit and the cat.
So yeah, so basically, yeah, terrestrial astrology is just really another way to
It's a way of describing
refer to more
Chinese astrology.
Yeah.
Because when we refer to Western astrology, the other name for it is that it is tropical astrology. What does tropical mean? It divides the earth into 12 sections. So tropical pertains just to the earth, but not necessarily to the land, but to the division of the earth. With Jyotish, they use what is called sidereal astrology, which means they divide the heavens into 12 sections where we see the whole solar system traveling every 30 degrees, about 2,600 years it takes. And so we're moving into what they call the Piscean age. I'm sorry, we're leaving the Piscean age. We're moving into the age of Aquarius, and will not be in that age completely until another 300 or 400 years. But things start to change. It doesn't take us to go to the 0 degree of Pisces and the last degree of Aquarius, because the ages move backwards in the zodiac. We follow the sun, Aries through Pisces, the constellations. The solar system moves around the Milky Way. On that belt, it goes from Aries to Pisces to Aquarius to Capricorn backwards, and that's the ages. So we can get into that discussion at another time to describe what the Piscean age was. The Piscean age was when Jesus came out into the scene, and we can describe how the age describes
during that time.
the Buddhas have been around a lot longer than that.
They have. But I was also there was an incarnation.
The Buddhas also became big at that time.
Right.
But the Piscean age deals with the confusion, and we'll get into that type when we get into that conversation. For now, what we want to establish is that there is a strong basis for astrology to be considered a science, not a pseudoscience. It's not a pseudoscience.
I don't need it to be a science.
Because the only thing pseudo about it is the subjective aspect of astrology. There is a objective aspect of astrology, like astronomy, and there's a subjective side. The subjective side would be me doing a chart reading versus Carrie doing a chart reading versus someone else doing a chart reading. There would be our subjective selves would enter into how we translate. But the value of that sign doesn't really ever change. You want to add something to that?
I was just actually saying that, um, you know, w- for me, the way that I approach this is what has happened to us is that we've gone through this whole industrial revolution and we've all really focused and emphasized on material science, like reducing things, distilling things down to a unit that will be effective, such as medication, and for example, rockets, launching rockets, all of those things. And so, in terms of material prosperity, we've learned to really honor and respect those things. Those are our go-to, whatever, 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 for validation. But the thing is that we're all suffering with a little bit trying to live our lives day to day. And no matter what happens and what remarkable discoveries we have, we still have to have a modality, a method, a way by which we communicate with each other and recognizing each other. And for me, even though we don't, we're not, nobody's winning any Nobel Peace Prizes for it. The most important thing in our lives is what we do for each other and with each other. And part of what happens with the whole material science process, and believe me, I love science. I have a degree. I can read nice little medical paper and understand what the body parts are. I'm going to have to look up some words, but it it doesn't have a way to measure the subtle if we only focus on that. And we've lost the connection in terms of starting out our lives valuing each other. And what we also see now, because a lot of people have moved away from religion, I happened to drive by a church the other day and I saw this priest. He must have been 36 years old. I was so surprised to see someone that young is still going into the practice. Um, Gosh, I'm sorry.
Well, there's a reason for that.
Right.
Astrological reason for
So,
it. There
and
is an astrological
there
reason
is,
for it.
yes,
Yes,
there
there
is.
is. We're
And
moving into the age of Aquarius.
that's right. That's right. And so what I was thinking though is that we have like identity politics are really strong in our culture right now, and there's a lot of themes. And what we have, and people are so much more aggressive and so much more organized over even things that we wouldn't have thought you would be organized over. And the and what I'm saying is that the reason that we're organizing in these groups, it's just like tribes. We're not we aren't having the direction. We aren't starting out with a direction to live and our lives the way we once did.
Well,
We have a new era and we have to reform new codes
well, I would see it
and new
slightly different
practices.
than you. This is where subjective astrology is
Right. And I
important.
yes, I'm
We don't necessarily read things the same way, but there's a point where they do meld together. For instance, I would say that there's more confusion in the world now than there has been in a long, long time. But
I agree with
for the
that.
last 2,000 years, that's all we've had. We've had
Well, that's what it is.
one
Right.
war after another war. One war was supposed to end the next war.
Right. The age of
World
Pisces
wars
is
were
the ocean
supposed
of
to be,
confusion.
yeah, the world wars were supposed to be to end all wars. And we're now at the end of the Piscean age, and we're getting the full blast of what the Piscean age
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
Pisces is
We're getting lots of crazy.
Pisces is a very important sign in that it is the culmination of the other 11 signs. So it
Right.
comprises the 12 astrological signs. And it says, I believe, in the when we describe each of the sayings that every sign has. What the English meant, because the English like to conjugate verbs and they like to condense words to not have it say two words that and they would make it one word by putting an apostrophe if an O is missing between not and so on. This is one of the things they did. So, in going in that fashion, my belief is that when we say I believe, that the English were really saying, I leave it be. For Pisces is the last sign. It is the sign that surrenders the ego. This is the fact about Pisces. Pisces represents nirvana. It represents yoga.
Unified field.
Yoga, yeah, unified field. Yoga was not the exercise of yoga. That came much, much, much later, and
Patanjali.
it was used to condition the body to have better meditation. But meditation in India meant that you sit with yourself and you lay quiet. You could use a mantra, or you could just count beads, which was what the rosary is all about, and let yourself meditate,
or a mala.
And let yourself meditate. This would cause you to transcend into nirvana, a place that cannot be described. And those people who have transcended, and all of us mostly do if we exercise meditation properly. And by the way, it happens to be a very simple system. One day, maybe we will, well, we know we will have we had a transcendental person here. We will have an instructor of transcendental meditation to give a lecture here at this podcast, and it will describe how easy it is to meditate. So people can transcend, and when they do, they cannot describe the state of transcendence.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Because you reach nirvana.
Yeah.
That is what Pisces represents. Now, let's keep one thing in mind about all of the signs. They all have presentations. They all represent something. But none of the signs are going to be completely that presentation. It's what they indicate. That's what they're traveling through. It doesn't mean that if you're born a Pisces, you live in nirvana. It simply means that the Piscean is conditioned to accept in that state of mind and to go into meditation more quickly. Did you want to check I heard a click in was there something happened on the
Oh,
chat
no,
room? Okay.
no.
Did you want to add anything to the meditation thing?
Yeah, I was, I don't. So what happens? So this is our time. The live readings are basically when we do spontaneous, whatever, maybe even spontaneous brain farts.
So we're just giving lecture on things that come to mind,
yeah.
and anybody that wants to participate in this conversation, please notate that and we'll answer it.
Yeah. Any comments, any mystical experiences, any questions you have afterwards?
So I hope we resolve what's terrestrial astrology. It's another word for Chinese astrology. It's also known as lunar astrology. And by the way, the Chinese astrology is driven by the planet Jupiter. And why? Because Jupiter takes 1 year to go through each of the signs, so it completes its cycle in 12 years. And Chinese astrology takes 1 year to go through each sign, and it completes its cycle in 12 years. So this is how that is. And you start to see the complication that is being used by these different planets to drive a sign. Well, you can imagine the mathematics involved. And for people to say that this was just based on myth, a bunch of herds people getting together, and when they learned to talk, they all of a sudden knew astrology in every detail possible.
Right. Well,
it was not possible.
Well, and I think also the assumption for us, right, it's inherent that we are more sophisticated than other people prior to us. And that may very well be true. Or they may have had some type of awareness or some type of knowledge that, what was present in the world for many years, what we do know are mystery schools. So you had, like, especially toward the late 1800s, you have all of this interesting insight and awareness coming out. Rudolf Steiner, if you're familiar with Gurdjieff, the Meetings with Remarkable Men is part of a description of part of Gurdjieff's spiritual journey. It's really interesting.
Well, what we're seeing today is that human beings are beginning to look outside the reference points that our previous generation and generations before that came up with, and they're asking intelligent questions. We're looking for more information. You're starting to see the beginning of the Aquarian age,
right?
Because the Aquarian age is about knowledge,
and it's time. And it now is also a time for us to all see how connected we are.
So as an age, we are going to start becoming more scientific. This idea of being remote of being able to communicate at great distances, be able to travel through space. These are all going to be Aquarian accomplishments. So just imagine what will take place in the next 2,600 years. I won't be around, but the people that will be around will not be thinking or acting or even dressing the way we are.
The constellation that is Michael now won't be around. And I do want to touch on that a little bit. So I think of myself, I think of everybody as a communities of consciousness that are organized in a particular way to reflect a particular energy form. And yeah, it's difficult. You get into these more subtle conversations. It's difficult to come up with the words. So I am a collective of consciousness that identifies as Carrie, for example.
Right. Well, yes,
And
we could consider ourselves a constellation because remember,
right,
cells are moving around us the same as the planets move around space, and the constellations move around each other,
right.
and they go on and on and on and on. Can anybody prove the end of anything or imagine what the end would be? There is no end to the universe.
Right.
Now, almost all are.
Yeah, the opposite of birth is not death.
Right.
That's not the opposite of
That's
birth.
another problem.
Right.
But most all astronomers are now indicating that the universe is infinite.
And expanding.
Well,
ever
if you
expanding.
take something that's mathematical, that equation must occur or take place in all aspects of equations. If the universe is infinite, so then too is life that lives on in the universe. And forget about whether there's life on other planets. That's a given, because if you have infinity, you must have infinite planets with life on it. It's very simple. When you use the word infinity, you can't imagine the beginning or the end of anything, because there is no beginning and there is no end. What's the time on this?
We're looking, yeah, we're getting, we're okay.
Are we done the hour?
Yeah, it's 1:55.
So we're past.
No, we're not.
Oh.
So you get to
Okay,
see this too.
let's go on then.
So yeah, so what I wanted to talk about, I can't today. I'm having a rough day today.
So then I will continue with this whole thing
Oh
about
well,
the
what I was talking about. Well, another example. Oh, this is what it is. When we do mantras and we do meditations, sound of any type, and there's all this research now. A really interesting field is called cymatics. I think it's S. You know what? Just voice requested in your phone. I don't have. What I'll do is I'll enter that term into the description when we're finished with the show. But cymatics are really interesting, which is a study of sound and frequency and the shapes that it creates. And so when we're doing mantras, when we're doing sounds, and there are mantras that are designed for us to say internally, there are mantras that are designed for us to say externally.
Yeah.
What we're really doing is we're retrieving one of the units of consciousness, the energy ribbon within us that corresponds to that. That's part of our true larger light body. Something else that would be really interesting, and I'll leave this also in the description as well, is rainbow body. Their ascension mechanics. And it's a branch of Buddhism. If you're capable of maintaining nothing but loving thoughts for 13 years, then you're able to ascend. So it's really interesting, and they show caves where there are some ancient sages that had like just put their handprint in the rock. There it is. So I always say to people, my goal in life is to levitate and teleport. And I think really that's where we all could start. That would be a really great way for us to bring peace and connection and love to a really difficult, complicated environment. If we all unplug from the beast, that's it.
So to go
it requires
further,
our attention.
To go further about how astrology was brought here to this planet, in my mind, at least from the course of my studies, and much of it is sort of intuited. And intuition is something that is a property of mankind that cannot be properly defined, but it comes from some level of intelligence
And
that
practice.
we cannot
Right.
just we cannot just repeat or make
Right.
ourselves do. It just seems to be part of consciousness, which is another subject that one day
Well, yeah,
we'll get into discussing consciousness and what does that mean. But astrology had to be very well defined, at least for mankind on this planet. We claim that the planet is 4.3 billion years old. How does a archaeologist determine the age of anything when he uses means of testing that he's developed in a lab? He comes in with chemicals and this and that, and he uses this
yeah, that's
very
radio argon
he,
dating.
he
That's
he uses all of these tools that he's developed to come up with the same conclusions everywhere.
I think
Supposing
it's phenomenal. So what they do is, when they are dating, like doing radiocarbon dating or doing potassium argon dating, that's the potassium argon dating is for the
All right, but that's
yeah.
measured only on the
Well,
basis of how much knowledge we have on this
right. Yeah,
planet.
so that's what I was saying. It's similar in terms of
We can't take it back
right.
4.3 billion years and say this is the way it was then.
Exactly.
And that is a problem with this.
Right.
We're measuring what we can see and touch here now. And we really can't describe what actually went on with the elements on the earth during the course of 4.3 billion years. It seems rather impossible that with something that we develop now in the 22nd century, that we can measure what went on 4.3 billion years. I don't think so.
But yeah, at the same time, what we are made for is developing systems
Yes,
by which to observe.
we have systems by which we can gather an understanding that we can rely on. But that's not necessarily what was going on
Oh
4.3
yeah, well,
billion
of
years
course
ago.
not. Of course not.
In other words, how do we know
Right.
how many times the earth has changed? We know that rocks come out of the earth and rocks go into the earth. We know that the earth changes, some of it sinks, some of it rises. We know that things turn
Exactly.
over. They're constantly churning. It is as if somebody was magically turning the earth upside down, much like a farmer when he tills the earth. He takes what's on the top and he twists it to the bottom. How do we know that the earth hasn't gone through that same process over and over and over and
Exactly.
over again?
Because wisdom is
And
experiential.
so we're making up we're determining numbers and
That's right.
ages on the basis of what knowledge we have, the little we have now. We're going from the micro and we want to describe the macro. You have to be at the
Right.
macro level to move into the macro.
And that's where you start getting into the sacred geometry and the fractals. The smallest unit of an object is also shown in its largest expression. It's repeating over. A really good person to check that out with is Randall Carlson and his website. It's just called Sacred Geometry. It's really interesting.
What I'm alluding to
Hmm.
is that there is infinity, that
Yes,
the planet is infinite.
of course,
It is no longer
because
the
it's
planet that it
consciousness.
started with, or in fact, there was no
Right,
beginning and there is no end.
right.
And we know that according to any of the books that we have, those that we hold near and dear over centuries, the Bibles of most civilizations, it is said that there is no beginning, a world without beginning, world without end. Now, why did we come up with those terms? If it wasn't that we were either taught that or that it is part of our consciousness.
Yes.
Because if we think, when did a thought start? Do we have any idea of any thought that you have? The one that you just had a second ago, the one that you're having now. Where did it come from? And most of all, where did it go? We don't know. What we know about life is that we don't know very much. That's probably the only thing we can say with some level of
Yeah.
certainty.
And it's still possible to know.
And the fact is that we know. This is one of the things that is amazing, because where do we come up with new knowledge? Out of the fact that we already know. It's a question of when we
Right.
discover it, when
Right.
we've expressed it, when it's come to the mind. And that's the only time we really know something.
I was even thinking of, well, kind of when you were talking about people talking about their beginnings, I always think about in the beginning was the word.
All right, then there was the
And
word, right?
and words and sounds and frequencies are signals for unique bands of consciousness.
Well, the word,
And mastering those
if
is
you
really the ideal.
if you go into what you would call into some of the religions have practiced this, the word was the sound ah. It was the sound of the universe.
Mm.
And the word caused life to exist because it gave movement to light. And physical matter is based on light, concentrated light. This is what now astronomers are beginning to understand, that in order to be something real, light has to be able to identify it, has to be able to shine
Right.
on it. So we don't even understand what light is all about. We think we know. But the amazing thing about knowledge is that when we finally conclude something and know something, the next thing we say is, I already knew that. How come it took
Right.
me so long
Right.
to know? It's as if you had to remember.
I have to tell you something funny. Michael and I, we're year of the dog. We're both year of the dog. You can tell we also have the bags under the eyes. You'll know year of the dog people by
We're
the
dogs.
worry. So we get into it, and
We're obedient.
right, but we'll also fight like dogs, right? All right, we're gonna get rabid. We're gonna get into an argument. No
Oh,
matter,
yeah.
no matter how intense our discussion is, and as soon as one of us makes a comment in our argument that's just connecting to the absolute, bam, it's just over. That's how our knowing works. It's
Mhm.
phenomenal. Um, and what I would really encourage anyone to do is practice allowing the information in. Practice making decisions. What is this? What is this energy? What is this frequency? How can I utilize this more effectively?
But most of all, if you're looking for something, and this is to encourage people as they may struggle through life and they may struggle with issues or with relationships, try to remember one of the things that was asked of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was the leader of transcendental meditation. He has since passed. But one of the things they asked him was, Maharishi, what is the problem with humanity? And he said, memory. We have
That's right. That's right.
lost memory.
Right.
If we can remember, we would be divine. We would turn into air and move across the universe
That's the story of the
instantaneously.
Bhagavad Gita, no?
Instantaneously. And if one reads the Mahabharata,
Oh,
is
it's
a great
okay.
writings of a war that took place between families in India over a gambling debt. And what happened is the families divided and they started fighting with each other. And one of the stories, one of the sections of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. And in this part of the this episode of the story, it was uh, uh, Krishna was on the well, there was Arjuna, who was the warrior who had to go and do battle with the other side, where he had uncles and cousins and aunts and so forth. And he's wondering, how can he possibly go there to kill them? And Krishna's on the chariot with him, talking in his ear and telling him, well, what makes you think you're going to kill them? What makes you think that they're not already dead? Uh, and through this talk, through this dialogue, and anyone who wants to read the Bhagavad Gita, they can. It is very difficult. I've read it once. I always promised myself to read it again, but I was one of these people that worked around the clock, and I mean I worked around the clock.
Yeah.
So I never got to read the Bhagavad Gita again, but I still have that book.
It's basically taken me 35 years to finally just start doing astrology, and Michael 50 years to just do astrology.
Well,
it's always been part of our lives, and we study it constantly, but we just never put ourselves out there. It's just like we're like people's favorite people at parties or something, you know?
So if any of you are interested in reading the Bhagavad Gita, I will tell you, first, do not try to understand it, because you won't. But it will leave something deep in your mind, because there's another part of you that understands everything. And that necessarily may be dormant or may be somewhat reticent in your mind. For some of us, it comes through real quick. But you will definitely gain something. At the end of this story, Arjuna, who is supposed to go out and do this battle, and Krishna, who is talking to him to muster up some courage, never tells Arjuna what to do. But Arjuna finally figures it out. And he says, "Now I remember." What was it that Arjuna remembered? Well, the Indians, and I hate to use the word Indian because we think of the American Indian, but India, they're the Indian religion.
Or Hinduism.
The Hinduism.
Oh, you're
Yeah, Hindu.
Oh, okay.
They teach that the knowledge that you're looking for is already contained within yourself. So what he remembered,
Even
what did
Buddhism
Arjuna
is a branch
remember?
of Hinduism,
Arjuna,
yeah.
in Hindu, you have what is called as karma. That comes from the Hindu. And dharma. Karma is duty, doing work. Or dharma is duty in terms of your role, your responsibilities. So that you come here to work out some previous, let's say, unfinished business, or that you have to put yourself to task. It is labor. And dharma is your responsibility. If you happen to be a father, your responsibility is to be a good father. If as a husband, your responsibility is to be a good husband. So what Arjuna remembered was his dharma. And what was his dharma? His dharma was to be a soldier. And he had to fight for his side. It had nothing to do with who he was killing and if they were dead, if they weren't dead. That did not matter. Because in the course of the universe, nothing dies and nothing is really created or destroyed. It appears created, it disappears as non-created. So when we're born, you can say we appear. And when we die, well, the best that we can actually say is that he disappeared. The body goes back to nothing, but there's something that was there before the appearance, and it rests after the appearance, and we call it the soul. At least every country and every religion refers to it as the soul.
They have some frame of reference.
There's something about each individual that is different from the other, and it survives all conditions. We're dealing with information that we cannot comprehend because scientists have no way of describing this. And this is where science reaches its apex. It reaches its high point, and it cannot describe more. So you have to go to something other than science to understand life.
We're just working on merging. Eventually, it will all become evident at some point. And I have to say, what I appreciate so much about Arjuna is I have my youngest daughter, by the way, I have two that are in their mid-30s. So my youngest, when she joined the military, she didn't tell anybody, and she kind of surprised us, and she was a little worried about my reaction. And Arjuna was perfect. I just said, she's an Aries for Pete's sake. Hello. And I said, you know what? Arjuna was a soldier. So if this is your if this is your purpose,
Arjuna would be represented by Aries. Yeah, it would be represented by Aries.
And so it's always been more important for me. Also for Michael, one of the things that bonds us is that I encourage my children or the people that I'm responsible for to be who they are and to connect to that. So we should probably close. We're a little over. We kind of give or take.
Oh, well, we want to have as much of a dialogue as possible, and eventually, people who view us are going to on the live shows will join us and ask questions about any of the topics that we cover. We try to stay with astrology, but as you see, we're beginning to expand because astrology is not enough, because astrology belongs to the wisdom of the universe, and everything else that we talk about hopefully contributes to that understanding, or at least that topic, the wisdom of the universe.
So when we close, I always like to leave you with some recommendations, some other places to check out. By the way, I really want to say this again. One of my favorite writers, I'm going to go back and review the Oversoul literature, is Jane Roberts. And Seth Speaks, phenomenal. It's really dense, amazing information. Big fan of also Bruce Lipton. He's interesting. He's a molecular biologist who also turned into more of a quantum science, spiritual, phenomenal speaker. And then the channels that I like to go, that I frequent when I get to, is Black and Orange Tarot, Linda G, the Comanche Psychic Violetta, Sterling, Celtic Tarot, The Way of Positive Change, Intuitive View, Third Eye Champagne, and The Spirit Within. Also, Joni Petrie, who is a prominent and very clear Vedic astrologer. She's a wealth of information. So, do you have any other final comments?
No, all I need to say is that for those who don't know what Vedic astrology is, it's astrology
It's really Jyotish,
of Jyotish, which is from India.
Science of light.
And that is a slightly different from the Western, but they align themselves very well. And in one of these podcasts, we will describe the difference between the two.
So, well, yes, we're in the middle of tax season, and what I said was we got to get online and start with the reading. So, as our schedule opens up more, we're definitely going to have some very interesting presentations that we will upload and share. So, everybody have a beautiful and blessed day. All of our love, and as always, travel light.
In the middle of tax season, please do not